All right, so welcome to Eco Gardening Myths, Misconceptions, and Mistakes. Um, I think you all probably know Zoom etiquette by now. Keep yourselves on mute. You can put questions or chat with each other in the chat if you would like to. I will probably not read the chat as I'm speaking, but I'll read it afterward because I'll get distracted and thrown off if I'm reading it and talking. But if you have questions, totally put them in the chat if you would like to, or save them until the end. Either way, it's fine with me. Okay. So I like to start all of my presentations with a land acknowledgement because I live and work on stolen land that was stolen from the Shawnee people, or the indigenous people who used to take care of the land where I live, which is now known as the Cincinnati area. Um, if you know whose land you live on, put it in the chat. If you don't know, then you can go to native-land.ca, and I can put that in the chat. Native-land.ca. And that's a link, and it has a map of the whole world of traditional indigenous territories in a lot of indigenous cultures. They say that saying out loud the name of the traditional land stewards makes the spirits of the land happy. So I like to do that. I like to pay my respect and acknowledgement and encourage other people to do that as well, especially if you are a white person of European ancestry like I am. Okay. So who am I? Some of you know me, some of you might not. My name is Tori. I have a Master of Science degree in Sustainable Design. I'm an ecologist and landscape consultant. I'm a soil advocate. I am certified in regenerative soil science. I've been gardening for over 10 years, and I've got some other master's certificates, all the things just to prove that I'm who I say I am. But this picture on the left is the woods where I grew up in here in Northern Kentucky. Um, Behind my parents' house is a few acres of woods, and I spent my childhood there observing all the natural processes. And I think that that really shaped who I am now. A very important thing to address is that the things we're going to talk about tonight, because we're talking about mistakes that people make in ecological gardening that can cause ecological harm. I want you all to know that I am not placing blame if you've done any of these things, if you know, have participated in the things that I'm going to say are mistakes and are harmful. I'm not blaming you. You obviously care enough to be here and learn, and we can only do uh what we can with what we know. So you don't know what you don't know, and we have been taught a lot of things that are incorrect, and you can't do much about that. So these are big systemic issues that have been happening for thousands of years, some longer than others, but it's not a you problem, it's a bigger problem. And the reason that we've been taught these things is because we've been destroying the soil. Humans, like the human race, has been destroying soil for thousands of years, going back to the Roman Empire. And um, so the soil's been so destroyed that our baseline is that plants and soil are unhealthy. And so as scientists have been studying plants and soil, they've been treating the lack of health and lack of soil biology as the baseline, and then working that way. And that has created a lot of problems. But now that we are learning about microbiology is a big thing, now that we have the technology to have powerful microscopes and see what is happening at a tiny, tiny scale that we didn't used to be able to see, we're learning a lot more. And so if I say things that you're like, what? I've never heard that before. This is why, and I learned a lot of it from my regenerative soil certification, which was by Matt Powers, who is an incredible regenerative soil and garden and farm person, and he is great. If you hear a cat making noises, it's because one of my cats believes that doors should never be closed. The door behind me is closed, and he's upset about it. So sorry if you can hear him. All right. Mistake number one. I put this as the first one because it's not talked about very often, and it was something that was a really big game changer for me. And that is not knowing your tap water parameters. If you're irrigating, if you're watering your plants with tap water, any water that comes from the city versus like well water or rainwater, you need to know the parameters, the water chemistry, which chemistry can be intimidating, I know, but it's really not that complicated. All you need to do to figure out your water parameters is you can buy test strips. Um, they make them, I have them for, because I have fish tanks. So they make some for fish tanks. You can buy them for pools. You can buy them just for testing your tap water. Just like you can get them online or wherever. They're relatively inexpensive. So a lot of tap water, not everywhere. It depends on where you are. Where I am, we have hard water, which means that the water has a lot of mineralization in it. And that mineralization can lock up the nutrients in the soil if you are watering your plants with it. A simple solution to this, if that's the only thing you've got going on with your tap water, is to add a little bit of vinegar, and that will change the pH, and it'll, kind of dissolve those minerals to become more plant accessible. And the amount of vinegar is going to totally depend on your water. So it's just a game of try it and test it. So add just a little bit of vinegar and then use your test strips and see what the pH is. And your test strips will have, an area for the pH, and it'll explain and everything on the container. The other thing is nitrate. So my tap water, along with being very mineralized, also has nitrate. So nitrate is a form of nitrogen. Nitrogen takes a lot of different forms. It ends up in our tap water because of fertilizer runoff, because people over fertilize their lawns. And then when it rains, that fertilizer runs off into municipal water supplies as well as natural water bodies. So because of that, my tap water has a lot of nitrate, and plants, especially perennial plants, do not like, this is like their least favorite form of nitrogen. And it encourages weeds. So the types of plants that do like nitrate are plants that you probably don't want, with some exceptions. Things like leafy greens and vegetables can be an exception. The other thing is that if you're using tap water, if you have water from the city, it is absolutely treated with either chlorine or chloramine. When you're testing your water, if it tests negative for chlorine, that means you have chloramine. So my tap water also has chloramine. So the point of having these chemicals in our tap water is to kill microbial pathogens, but that means it also kills the microbes in your soil that you want to, have there. So it's not good to use on your plants. Chlorine, if you just have chlorine, it'll evaporate after about 24 hours. So you can fill up a bucket with water and then just leave it for a day or two, and the chlorine should be gone. If you have chloramine, it does not evaporate. Um, so you can use a dechlorinator that you can buy. Again, I have this stuff because I have fish tanks and like, so I have to care about water chemistry. But again, relatively inexpensive to buy a dechlorinator. Um, however, the solution, long-term solution would be I personally collect rainwater and then I use that on my plants. And I've noticed an enormous difference in the health of my house plants and my garden and my nursery plants from using rainwater instead of tap water because my tap water is so wacky, which you might have great tap water and not have this problem. Um, it depends on where you live. The other option is getting an RO reverse osmosis system, which is kind of like a fancy filter that gets rid of everything in the water. It's a little bit of an investment. You can get them for like a couple $100, but it's definitely worth it if you have crappy tap water. Mistake number two is not knowing what's growing in your yard. So this picture on the left, this is climbing milkweed. And for a long time, I thought that this plant was bindweed, which is invasive, but it's actually a milkweed that is native and a host plant for a lot of insects. So that's why you need to know what's growing so that you're not letting invasives grow and you're not pulling things that are actually beneficial. Um, the things that are growing in your yard just on their own can also tell you a lot about the soil. Um, this is, I think, where if you follow me on Instagram and you saw that post I made a few months ago about people were encouraging others to embrace invasive plants. We don't embrace invasive things here, but I think what sparked that were because I was seeing a lot of posts on Instagram of people saying uh, to embrace invasive plants. And before that, I had seen a post that was actually a really, great post about using invasive plants as sort of a diagnostic tool for your soil. And I think people took that out of context and thought that it meant the invasive plants were helping the soil. Invasive plants do not help the soil, quite the opposite. They can cause a lot of harm to the soil, and they can also just be a symptom of problems with the soil. So when you know what's growing, you can, look up the conditions in which those plants thrive, and you'll probably find, especially if you have lots of things growing that you didn't plant, weeds and volunteer plants, you will probably find that they like similar conditions, and that can tell you a lot about your soil without having to do actual testing. Um, so how do you identify plants? So I think the easiest way to identify plants is to utilize technology, because if you're watching this, you have internet access, so why not take advantage of it? Um, you can, iNaturalist is a great resource. It is an app and a website where you can take photos of plants and also wildlife, and you upload it with, your location, and it's kind of like crowdsourced, so people um, will identify things, and it'll also tell you whether it's native or like its status of native or invasive or non-native but not invasive. Um, iNaturalist it's great. It's like a whole community, awesome resource, and it's free. So like, why not? Um, Picture This is another app that I use, where you just take a picture of the plant and then it um, compares it to its database of images of uh, plants and tells you what it thinks it is. And then it also will show you a map of like the status of whether it's native or non-native and where. It shows you, I think, just a map of the US. I don't know about outside of the US. Um, I have a whole tutorial about this that's free on my website. And it is my website, nativegardening.com/how-to-identify-plants. So if you are interested in that, you can write that down. And I so it removes the need for you to memorize everything, because it's a lot if you're trying to memorize every plant so you know what's growing in your yard. Um, but as you start doing this, and you start, taking pictures, identifying what it is, you're going to memorize it because there's going to be a lot of the same plants growing in your area. If you walk around your neighborhood, you're going to see a lot of the same invasives, a lot of the same um, volunteer natives, some of the hardier ones, things like that. And then it kind of, you're memorizing without having to do the hard work just because you're doing it over and over looking at photos. So mistake number 3 is similar, which is not knowing what you're buying. When you go to garden centers or nurseries, most of them, unless you know for sure if they're like a native nursery, if they're, it'll tell you in their marketing if they are not selling invasives. But most of them sell lots of invasives. Um, and just because something is widely sold does not mean it's not harmful. Um, I wish that it was, that way, that they were not allowed to sell plants that are ecologically harmful, but they do. So this photo on the left is actually, so this is English ivy, which is one of my arch nemesis, and it's growing on an invasive tree. It's growing on Tree of Heaven. Um, and my whole neighborhood is taken over by English ivy. It's everywhere. And if you go to the plant nursery that's down the street from me, they sell English ivy, which is like, first of all, they shouldn't be selling it, but secondly, people are buying it when it's like literally everywhere. Um, so if you go to the garden center and you don't know, you pick up a plant and you say, this is pretty and I like it. You can just quickly do an internet search on your phone, search the name of the species and then like native range or invasive, things like that, just to see what comes up, because you don't want to be planting things that are invasive, because invasive plants cause so many problems. The other thing is not to trust quote unquote wildflower seed mixes. A lot of them, they'll even, like my cousin sent me a few months ago, he messaged me and was like, I want native plants in my yard. We have this like area that I want to work on. Can you look at this seed mix and tell me, like, is this good? And it was marketed as Kentucky wildflowers. And I looked through the list of the species and it was almost entirely stuff from Europe and Asia. Like very few, there was maybe like 1 or 2 species that are native to Kentucky. So, but also like there are legitimate native wildflower seed mixes out there. It's just a matter of looking at the species and doing your research and look up each species, and unless it's from like a very reputable seller who does, ecological conservation work, then they're probably not going to sell you foreign plants in a native seed mix, but be very careful with that. All right, mistake number 4 is planting non-native plants and calling them pollinator plants or expecting to have a pollinator garden with foreign plants. 90% of all plants eating insects are specialists. 90% of all, there's a bajillion insects in the world, and 90% of them are specialists. Specialist means that They need one genus, one type of plant to complete their life cycle. So at some point in their life cycle, usually it's the larval stage, like caterpillars, but sometimes it's, their whole life cycle. They can't eat anything else. Like nothing else will give them the proper nutrition. And it's the concept of when we think of monarch butterflies with milkweed, and how, they need the milkweed. It's that, but with 90% of all plant eating insects. And their host plant, the plant that they can eat, is always going to be a native plant because they evolved together. And the insect had to spend its evolutionary energy, um, bypassing the plant's immune system if it has, poison or thorns, whatever, to be able to eat it. And because of that, it can only eat that type of plant. And I think the misconception here is that people think if a plant flowers, that means that it's good for pollinators. And that's not how it works. I like to use this metaphor, and sometimes people on the internet get mad at me for it, but and they say it's an exaggeration, but it's not. Um, it's like saying that, just because a bee is pollinating a flower, is the same as just like, if you're saying just any flower, is the same as a human eating food, and just any food. So like you could, as a human, uh, only drink Mountain Dew and eat French fries for your whole life, and you would be eating, but could still be malnourished and you would not be healthy. And it's the same way with foreign plants, foreign flowers for pollinators. They need those specific native plants to get the proper nutrition. And if you are interested in like finding the best native plants for your specific area in the United States, the National Wildlife Federation has a tool called the Native Plant Finder, and you can just Google Native Plant Finder and it'll come up, and it'll show you by your zip code, like what native plants are most needed for the most insects in your area. It's a really cool tool. 10 out of 10 recommend. All right, mistake number 5 is ignoring plant spacing. And I have been guilty of this in the past. Because what we do is, when you buy a plant to plant, or if you're growing from seed, you're almost never going to be planting in the ground a full grown plant. So you have to leave that spacing for it to grow. But often, we'll plant them and they're small, and then you want to like fill in all the space. But don't fill it in with plants, fill it in with mulch. Um, because so there is this framework by a man named John Kempf, who works in regenerative agriculture, and very smart man, who made this framework called the Plant Health Pyramid. And I teach this in my online course, Gardening for the Future. But the first stage of the plant health pyramid, and when you get to the top stage of it, the plant becomes immune to pests and pathogens, essentially. But the very just baseline stage is called complete photosynthesis, which so all of the leaves need to be able to photosynthesize to reach this level of plant health. And so when you're crowding things, they will, you're blocking that light off from some of the leaves, and it's going to stress out the plants. And so when plants are stressed, they will release simple sugars into the soil instead of complex sugars. And simple sugars attract pathogens, they attract bad bacteria and pests, versus complex sugars will attract the soil microbes that are really beneficial. So you don't want to stress out your plants in this way by just like overcrowding them. I know that is tempting, but do your best. Mistake number six kind of goes along with the last one, and that's not like setting up a wild area in your yard. People do this a lot where it's like, I'm gonna just have a space and not touch it, and it'll become wild. That's not really how it works, because our landscapes are so damaged from so many things over so long that we can't just let them go and expect them to go back to quote unquote wild. They need our help to get back to that state. Um, and it can cause similar problems with overcrowding and things out competing each other. You're going to end up with invasives if you're not in there checking and pooling things. And yeah, so this is my like quote unquote wild area in my yard, and it's like my side yard. And this stuff is all fine for the most part. But when you go back farther, that's not in the photo, because this past summer I was busy and kind of neglected the side yard because I was working on the front yard and some, lots of other things. But so I ended up with like it's a very small space, and there was like easily 20 trees growing in this tiny area. And there's not enough space for all those trees. And then underneath the trees, there's a bunch of like English ivy, which is invasive. Um, so that's what happens when you just let it go. You end up with overcrowding, invasives, and just stuff that's not good. So you want to, you can have, if you're trying to make like a wild area, because like this photo on the left, I would consider this is all volunteer stuff. Like I did not plant any of this. I did not pay. I paid $0. It all just showed up. I just facilitated to make space for it. So you can totally do that, but you have to monitor it to some extent to make sure invasives aren't coming in and taking over, and that you don't have 20 trees growing on top of each other. All right, mistake number 7 is the one that really is my biggest pet peeve, is people killing bugs for no reason. Because a third of all insect species right now are at risk of extinction. We are living in one of the largest mass extinction events that has ever happened on the planet Earth right now. And a lot of that has to do with insects. Insects are the bottom of the food chain. We need them to pollinate plants, to have food. We need them to feed other animals. They're very important. So plants have immune systems, just like people do and other animals do. So if you have a plant that's being totally killed by bugs, that means that that plant was not healthy to start with. And the solution is not to kill all the bugs, with the exception of invasive bugs, which I'll talk about in a second. The solution is not to kill the bugs, it's to increase the health of the plant through soil. And people like to kill things like wasps and spiders. I love wasps. I know everyone hates them, but they're pollinators. They are pest control. They are predators. They have potential like medicinal uses. Like there's so many, they're very understudied because people are scared of them. I took this photo right here. My hand was inches away from this wasp. It didn't care because it was pollinating my asters. So lots of pesticides that you can use, and it's my personal professional opinion that both pesticides and herbicides should require a license to be able to use, because people like to spray them willy-nilly thinking that that is what you're supposed to do, but it's really a big problem. And this includes neem oil. There's always, if you Google organic pest control, neem oil is going to come up. The active ingredient in neem oil is a systemic pesticide, which means that it affects the entire plant, including the pollen, So when bees come and they pollinate the flowers, they're going to die. Um, so just stay away from pesticides. Um, and now, so the exception to all of this would be invasive species, invasive insects, which is why you need to know uh, what the insect is before you just kill it just because you're like, oh, that's a bug, I'm gonna kill it. So like right now in North America, we have the spotted lanternflies that have arrived recently and are causing a lot of problems. If you see those, just squish them. You don't need to spray, just squish them, kill them. Japanese beetles are another common invasive pest that will kill your garden. And there are some natural solutions to those, but in general, if your plants are healthy, they're not going to be uh, destroyed by insects, because if insects could just come in and kill all plants, then plants would be extinct by now. And I'll often hear people, like I saw somebody say recently, like they had a problem with their one of their vegetables getting eaten, and like the plants around them were all fine. And it's like, that's because that plant's not healthy. Its immune system is weakened and it's sending out signals for pests and pathogens to come eat it. And I believe you have a quote here. So this is a quote from the book Regenerative Soil, The Science and Solutions by Matt Powers. 10 out of 10. Great book. It's actually a textbook. But it says, when stressed, plants send out a very loud signal to the world that they want to be eaten, inoculated, and decomposed back into SOM, which is soil organic matter, to try again some other time as some other plant. Plants can't lie. They can't pretend that they're not thriving. So when they get, when they get stressed out, all the pests and pathogens come to eat them so that they can go back into the soil and try again. All right, mistake number 8 is tilling and excessive digging. It always shocks me when people tell me that they till the soil in their garden still. I guess just because it was one of maybe the first things I learned of like what not to do. Um, so tilling is a big reason of why our soil is so dead around the world. And again, that goes back to as early, if not earlier, than the Roman Empire. Um, so soil is a carbon sink that is 2 times or 3 times larger than the atmosphere. So when we till or dig very deep, we are releasing the carbon that's stored in the soil back into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas. It also destroys the microbiome in the soil that is essential to soil health, and that is how the soil actually works. And people, when I tell them that tilling is bad, they say, well, then how do you aerate the soil? It's not our job as humans to aerate the soil. We should think of ourselves as facilitating the organisms that do aerate the soil, which is SFW, is a soil food web. So the microbes, the insects, the birds that are, digging and looking for caterpillars, the moles that are digging tunnels, the other small animals that are making burrows and they're digging, all of those things do enough aeration of the soil to make sure the soil is aerated enough, because it really doesn't need, and we're actually learning that it needs a lot less aeration than we actually even thought. If your soil is really compacted and you can't work with it, you can use a broad fork and only in the top couple inches to loosen it up and just kind of like, loosen it. You can, so if you're just digging in the top couple inches, that's not nearly as harmful. That's fine. Some people do no dig, which is where you're just adding compost on top of the soil and you're working in the compost. And you're not ever touching the soil, you're just adding on, building up the soil. And that is kind of the ideal way to do things. But it requires you to have a lot of compost. Mistake number 9 is one of the biggest one, is emphasizing soil nutrients over soil biology. Um, your soil most likely has the nutrients that it needs, that your plants need. But what it probably doesn't have, unless you've been actively working on it or is in a space that has not been disturbed for a very long time, um, what it doesn't have is the microbiology that operates things and makes the whole system work for a long time. And this is relatively new information. If you don't know about the soil food web and soil microbiology, it really was not studied at all until the 90s, when a woman named Dr. Elaine Ingham started her doctoral research, and she was kind of people didn't think that it was a good idea for her to be studying it or that it was worthwhile, but she found lots of awesome stuff, and she still is working in soil now. Um, so your plants can test positive for nutrients that the soil tested negative for, and also vice versa. And that is because the microbes can go and find nutrients and bring them back. And there can be nutrients that your plants are not able to access because they're locked up. Because plants prefer to get their nutrients from eating. They will actually eat the microbes. So their roots like grow around the microbes when you look at it under a microscope. And they also eat microbial waste. So the microbes will eat the nutrients, things like nitrogen, and then they will expel waste. And then the plants very much, it turns it into things like amino acids that are way more plant available, and the plants can access them much more easily. And so with things like fertilizers, you can end up doing a lot of damage with them. I don't like synthetic fertilizers at all, because plants can only absorb the nutrients that they need. So if you're adding excess nutrients, if it is just sitting in the soil, then when it rains, those nutrients run off into municipal and natural water bodies and cause all kinds of problems. And then if the plant does absorb it, but isn't able to transform it into secondary metabolites, then it's going to attract pests and pathogens. And that's part of the plants giving off that signal of come eat me. And number 10, y'all know that I love compost. And so this mistake is not composting. I know a lot of people tend to get maybe intimidated or overwhelmed by the idea of composting. I know that I was for a long time. I felt that way, but really it's very simple. And I promise that you do make enough waste for it to be worth it. And you can do it on any scale. So you can do it on a huge scale if you have a farm and you have, a whole system, or you can do it just something that's the size, make a worm bin the size of like a shoebox in your kitchen, and anything in between. And there's so many different techniques for composting that involve different amounts of maintenance and effort on your part. Some require very little, some require a lot. Yeah, so, and I teach all of that again in my course, and I also have an ebook that teaches like 4 different methods. And so most compost that you can buy at the store or get through like like municipal composts are not going to be nearly as good as what you can make, and they can even be harmful. Store-bought composts often come from um, they have plant matter in it that have been treated with pesticides and herbicides. They have um, manure from farm animals that have been treated with antibiotics and dewormers. So when you have all of those things are meant to kill life, and especially when you think of antibiotics and dewormers are meant to kill the things that you're trying to grow in your compost. So store-bought compost, unless it's like a very reputable seller. And municipal composts, because they kind of like put whatever in them because they're just taking it from people's homes, they have to heat it up at a really, really high temperature, which thermophilic compost is a great way to make compost, hot compost, and it does have to get um, to a certain temperature, but the municipal composts go above that temperature, and then that ends up gassing off like a lot of the nutrients, and so you're really not getting nearly what you could. So I'm an advocate of making your own compost. Again, doesn't have to be complicated, can be done on a very small scale, and is totally worth it. Okay, so those are all my mistakes and myths and misconceptions. And now I want to tell you that enrollment for my online course, Gardening for the Future, is open right now. It's open through Friday, right before midnight Eastern time. So this is the link, nativegardening.com/course. It's a 6-week self-paced online course. You get lifetime access to everything. We do live Q&A calls. We have a Discord server that you can join and talk to me whenever, talk to each other, have community, ask questions, post pictures. Yeah, so right now it is $197, and I do have payment plans. So if you need that, that's totally fine. Doesn't bother me if you use a payment plan. But tomorrow the price is going up. But I wanted you all, people who came to this event, to get the cheaper price if you would like to. I have not announced anywhere else yet that enrollment is open. So right now it's 11, but tomorrow it's going to increase by $50. So you can save $50. So this, I charge $150 an hour. The course has over 12 hours of content. It has guest lectures. I just had a pop-up. This is my connection's unstable. Hopefully y'all can hear me. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. So yeah, I have like all the things that I make, I put in the course. So like I sell my ebooks on my website, and whenever I make a new one, the course, it just gets uploaded to the course portal and everybody gets it. So you get all the things, and then I add to it over time, which is why the price increases, because there's more content in it now than when people bought it, but you will get access to new content for no additional cost. And so for this live round, we're going to do bi-weekly Q&A calls. So every other week for 6 weeks, we'll do a live Zoom call where we can come and talk, and you can ask me questions about the content, questions about your garden, questions about whatever questions you have. And I will happily answer them. So yeah, this is valued at almost $3,000, but I'm only charging $197. And again, there's payment plans. So take advantage of that. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing now, and I wanted to know if any of you have any questions. I will answer your questions about your yard, about gardening in general, anything that I talked about in the slideshow, or if you have questions about the course or whatever your questions are, you can put them in the chat or raise your hand if you know how to do that in the reactions. Yeah, Catherine, you can come off mute.
Hi, thanks,
Hi.
Tori. I actually learned quite a bit just then. I am very, very new to gardening. My mom has always gardened, and I finally have a yard. I've always made, just done plants inside, or on the porch or whatever. So I am really excited about the course, actually. So I'm looking forward to it. But I also, um, I my front yard is grass, but it's like under trees, and it's like trash grass, but like everybody, it's like kind of like keeping up with the Joneses kind of block where people are, sorry. I forgot I was unmuted. Sorry, we have many dogs. So I'm working towards a native front yard. The backyard doesn't have any grass, but it's a very small space. Is it best to just, well, a couple of things. Should I start doing that now? Or is it too late in the season to try to get rid of the grass? I pulled some out and did some planting in the fall. But like, do I cover it with cardboard? And like I've read to cover it with cardboard and then with like either compost or what's the other thing? Mulch? I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yep.
I'm in Chicago, by the way.
Okay, cool. It's definitely not too late. You've got plenty of time. It takes like, if you're gonna smother it with cardboard or with a tarp or with whatever, it takes, maybe like 6 weeks. So you've got plenty of time. And I mean, you could technically do it at any point. It's just nice to do it over winter when things aren't growing. So you don't have to, you're not like taking up your time where you could be doing other things. But yeah, you can just smother it and then either cover it with compost and then plant into the compost, or with, you can also, like, if you don't have enough compost or haven't made it yet, you can just pull up the cardboard and then plant where the dead grass is, and then just mulch around it, so that makes sure that it's not like bare soil. You don't want any bare soil, so you'll put your plants and then just like mulch around where you planted. Does that make sense?
Yes, but can you tell me why no bare soil? That's amazing. I love that. Because it just releases the gases of the nutrients, or what?
The exposure to the sun and the elements and everything is just very bad for it and can cause erosion. So you want to always cover soil.
Oh, thank you so much.
Of course. Did you have anything else, or?
I mean, I could talk to you all night long. I'm not kidding. I'm like, yeah. No, but I leave room for other questions, of course.
Are amino acids secondary metabolites? No. But amino acids are more of like proteins and things that plants will absorb more easily, whereas the secondary metabolites are like your tannins and your the things that make plants desirable. So like the scent and the flavor and the yeah, all those things. Anybody else have questions? Like I said, you can ask me whatever. I don't know. I'll answer if I have the answer.
I guess, when does the course start? Does it lead, are you doing it as like a lead up to spring, sort of, or
So it's
a
self-paced.
little bit more? Oh, okay.
So you'll get just access to the portal, and then it's all already in there. But I do send out, like, so
The
when we
live
do,
stuff. Yeah.
yeah, live rounds. I'll send out a survey to find like when is a good time for people to do
Mm-hmm.
live calls, and then I'll send because it's set up by weeks. So I'll send like every the beginning of every week, just kind of like a here's what this week is about, just for people who like to have a little more structure and kind of need a reminder or whatever. But it's self-paced and it all stays in there. So if you can't go, all at once, you can always come back to it. Dr. Elaine Ingham recommended literature. Is that a question, Daniel, or a statement? I don't know if she's actually like written a book. Um, she has the Soil Food Web School has a YouTube channel and they do webinars often with just like all kinds of great information. You could watch hours and hours of stuff on there, and it's great. I don't know if I'm sure she's published lots of like academic papers, but I don't think she has a book. But the textbook that I mentioned, Regenerative Soil Science and Solutions, Dr. Elaine edited that and like peer reviewed it. So she did have a hand in that book. But she's got lots of stuff all over the internet. If you just Google her, she's all over. Very smart lady. Soil Food Web School. I'll put that in the chat. Um, I think there's a link to it in the Discord, Daniel, because Daniel's already in the course and Daniel's my hype man. He hypes me up. I can also actually show you. So let me hold on 1 second. I'll let you guys look at the course portal. Share your screen. So I recently changed. So if anybody's in the course already and you're watching this and you're like, this looks different, I sent you all an email about it, but I changed platforms just because this one I like it more. But it's all the same content. So you all who are already in the course should have gotten an email with login info. If you didn't, then send me an email. But yes, so there's all the books and printables and things that I sell are in here. I'm working on making like a garden design workbook thing that I'll sell, but will be in here and you'll get it for free if you join the course. Week 1, planning and getting started. So we go over like knowing your site, knowing how to identify things, working with the seasons. And then we have like little like worksheets and things and templates. Um, and then the live calls are always recorded and then uploaded in here too. So if you want to listen to other people's questions, we had some good conversations in the first live round for sure. Um, Talking about climate change, biodiversity, and I like to include things like this is a PDF of by Current Biology magazine. So I like to like include resources that are not made by me, but that are relevant along with the stuff. So these are all videos that range from like 5 minutes to like 30 minutes. Um, Go into soil science. These videos are a little bit longer. Composting, a bunch of different ways to compost, water, drought resiliency, flood resiliency, calculating stormwater, growing food, and growing in small spaces for people. There are people in the course already we have people who live in apartments and don't even have a growing space, but like to do things like guerrilla gardening, or they grow indoors, or they grow in containers on a balcony, which is all totally a valid way to grow and is still very helpful. Um, and then we have people who have like acres and acres of land. So like anywhere in between this stuff, it applies. And then we have, is Bella here? I can't see everybody who's here. Bella's not here, but it's her birthday, so I'll forgive her. Um, so we have this guest lecture that Bella did that was really great, about seed saving. And I plan on getting more guest lectures. Our one for the last live round is still happening eventually, but the person who was going to do it had a lots of life stuff and they were moving, and it just like didn't happen. But I do definitely still have them on my radar of wanting them to give a presentation on like self-sufficiency. They do a lot of like zero waste, and they do a lot of food preservation and stuff, and so we will get that there eventually. And I also plan on finding more guest speakers, because obviously I can't speak on everything, and I also like to have kind of a diversity of perspectives. This I think is important in every context.
I know somebody who talks really dope shit around weeds and like the value of some weeds, and like especially like native and stuff, like really, really beautiful stuff happening in Chicago with like folks that are in the community gardens through the park district and stuff. I can send you some links if you want
Yeah,
to
for sure.
meet new people. Where are you located? I didn't think I hear that part. Oh,
Um,
like generally.
so I'm just south of Cincinnati.
Oh, cool.
Technically, people get confused because I live in Kentucky and Cincinnati is in Ohio, but I live literally like 5 miles from Cincinnati. So,
Oh, that's hilarious.
and actually
Kentucky is beautiful.
it is beautiful. We have our problems, but it
Oh,
is
yeah.
beautiful.
Yes, I
I
know.
think it's like one of the poorest states in the whole country, but um, it is beautiful for sure. But fun fact, the Cincinnati International Airport is in Kentucky, even farther south than I am.
That's
A
hilarious.
lot of times people will, if they don't know that, they'll like get off the airplane and like look at their phone and be like, I'm in Kentucky. I got on the wrong airplane. It's like a whole thing. So, you know, Cincinnati / Kentucky.
Funny. Thank you
But yeah,
so
so
much.
if anybody who's in the course, or if you do join the course, if you have somebody that you think would be a good guest lecturer, definitely send me their info. I would like to get more voices in the course teaching. All right, so it's just about 7. Unless anybody else has a question, and we can wrap up. Chris Benda, DM me that, Daniel. Thank you. Cool. Yeah. So that is all. And thank you all for being here. I appreciate you, and I will see you around. Feel free to DM me or email me if you have questions, comments, or concerns. Have a wonderful night.